Dimitri Armstrong was born and raised in the humble outskirts of Chicago. His mother, a sweet and hard-working nurse, struggled to raise him alone after his father mysteriously disappeared when he was still a baby. She always told Dimitri that his father was a good man, but had been deceived by people who didn't deserve his trust. From a young age, Dimitri demonstrated a strong and determined mindset. He worked part-time jobs while studying, always prioritizing education as his ticket to a better future. His mother, although worried about the burden Dimitri carried, always supported him, admiring his strength and resilience. After graduating with honors from high school, Dimitri received a full scholarship to the prestigious University of Chicago. He excelled in his business administration studies, graduating at the top of his class and catching the attention of several renowned companies. Unfortunately, at that time Dimitri's mother passed away, leaving him very sad, but the man soon rose and became even stronger. He began his career at a financial consulting firm, where he quickly climbed the ranks thanks to his dedication, intelligence, and ability to solve complex problems. His rise was meteoric, and in just a few years, he became one of the youngest and most successful executives in Chicago. However, Dimitri's rise came with its own set of challenges. He became tough and ruthless, focused only on his work and his own ascension. He forgot the lessons of humility and compassion that his mother taught him, and this change in personality became evident in his treatment of those he saw as inferior, like the homeless man he regularly encountered on his way to work. It was a cold winter morning in Chicago when Dimitri was on his way to work. Always in a hurry, he barely noticed the huddled figure of a homeless man sitting on the sidewalk. Sitting on the cold concrete sidewalk, a homeless man seemed carved out of despair and desolation. His face, marked by the scars of time, displayed a distant look that seemed to search for answers somewhere in the urban infinity of Chicago. With trembling, wrinkled hands, he extended his dirty palm towards Dimitri. His hoarse voice echoed over the noise of the city, "Please sir, could you help me with some change?" Interrupted in the middle of his way to work, Dimitri stopped, frowning in irritation. He looked at the homeless man, a cold and indifferent look in his piercing blue eyes. "Why don't you get a job instead of sitting here, begging and bothering people who actually contribute to society?" Dimitri said, his voice filled with contempt and arrogance. His raised tone attracted the attention of other pedestrians, who stopped to watch the scene. The homeless man lowered his head, his features hidden under the shadow of an old faded cap. "I had a life once, sir. But not everything goes as planned," he said, his voice only a whisper. Dimitri scoffed, ignoring the man's response. He adjusted his tie, looked at his watch, and resumed his walk, leaving the homeless man behind, unaware that the forlorn and forgotten man held the key to the mystery of his past. The days had turned into a predictable routine, and with them, the daily encounter with the homeless man had become a constant part of Dimitri's life. Like a clock, the man was there, positioned on the same cold Chicago sidewalk, his presence as constant as the cold bronze statue of the city's founder in the nearby park. The homeless man, with his worn coat and faded cap, always extended his hand in a silent plea for help. His tired and sad eyes seemed increasingly lost, as if with each passing day, a part of him disappeared into the merciless cold. Dimitri, however, became increasingly irritated with the homeless man's presence. He began to wonder why the city did nothing to clean up the streets. In his mind, the homeless man was no longer a man, but a constant reminder of what he believed to be society's inefficiency. Each encounter became an opportunity for Dimitri to take out his frustrations on the man. "Still here? Don't you have anything better to do?" he would say, or "Why don't you go get help at a shelter?" His words were always filled with contempt and humiliation. He saw the homeless man as a nuisance, a burden, someone who chose their own misery. Dimitri had no idea how this daily routine, this dance of disdain and indifference, was about to change. He didn't know that the truth about the homeless man would bring to light secrets of his past that would shake the world he so carefully built. On a particularly tranquil morning, Dimitri was in his office, enveloped by the familiar smell of old books and fresh coffee. The warm light of the autumn sun penetrated through the large glass windows, illuminating the particles of dust dancing in the air. It was then, in the midst of the day's routine, that he was surprised by an unexpected correspondence. There was no sender, no postmark, no postage stamp. Just a time-yellowed envelope, stained here and there, giving the impression of having traveled more than any ordinary envelope. Curious, Dimitri opened the letter, revealing an old, faded photograph. Upon seeing it, the air seemed to leave his lungs. There, stamped in the photo, was his mother. Young, beautiful, her eyes shining with the same vivacious glow he remembered. She was accompanied by a man he couldn't identify. He was a handsome fellow, with a gentle look and a smile that seemed strangely familiar, but whom he was sure he had never seen before. Turning the photo over, Dimitri found a short but impactful message, written in sloppy handwriting: "He always loved you, even from afar." The words seemed to echo in his head, provoking a whirlwind of confused emotions and unanswered questions. Who was that man? Why had he never heard of him before? And above all, what did all this mean? The revelation of the photograph triggered a whirlwind of emotions within Dimitri. Every fiber of his being trembled in confusion and fear, but also in determination. He had to know the identity of the man in the photo, a figure so intimately connected to his mother and, by extension, himself. Driven by this need, Dimitri turned to the help of Samuel Pearson, a private detective famous for his investigative skills. A man of medium stature, with premature gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed capable of penetrating the deepest secrets of the human soul. "I need to know who he is, Samuel," Dimitri pleaded, extending the faded photo to the detective. The detective's eyes studied the image, then met Dimitri's, noting the intensity of his eagerness. "I'll do what I can, Dimitri. I'll find the truth," Samuel promised, and although his voice was calm, Dimitri could feel the firmness of his determination. Time seemed to have stretched out, each day a repetition of the last, as Dimitri waited for news. Finally, after weeks of uncertainty, the answer came. Samuel summoned Dimitri to his office, a place cluttered with papers and evidence from numerous cases, to reveal what he had discovered. "The man in the photo is Thomas Elliot," Samuel said, the severity in his voice making Dimitri's heart skip a beat. "Your father." The statement hit the silent room like a thunderbolt. Dimitri had always believed that Thomas Elliot, the man he understood to be his father, had abandoned him and his mother when he was just a baby. But, as Samuel continued, it became clear that the truth was much more complex and painful. "Your father didn't abandon you, Dimitri. At least, not in the way you thought," explained Samuel, going on to reveal a story of lost love and hidden tragedies, of a father who loved his son from afar, for reasons beyond his control. The revelation shook Dimitri to his core, leaving him with a sense of vertigo and a surprising emptiness. The truth, after all, had the power to dismantle the narratives we tell ourselves, revealing a much more complicated and, in some ways, more human reality. "Thomas Elliot wasn't just a man, Dimitri," Samuel began, his voice heavy with weight. "He was a promising young businessman, a rising star, with the ambition and talent to make his dreams come true." Dimitri swallowed hard, his mind trying to reconcile the image of the father he knew with the one Samuel was describing. "But life is a cruel game, Dimitri," Samuel continued. "A treacherous blow from his partners took everything from him. They left Thomas with nothing, not even a chance to fight back." A heavy pause filled the room as Samuel let the words settle. So, desperate and ashamed, he made the hardest decision of his life, to step away so as not to be a burden to his young family. Dimitri felt a sharp pain in his chest. Samuel's words were like splinters, each one piercing his heart. He tried to rebuild his life, Dimitri, Samuel continued, his voice full of sadness. But bad luck followed him, and he ended up with nothing, living on the streets. And then, Samuel revealed the final piece of the puzzle. He opened a folder and pulled out a photograph, placing it on the table. It was a recent photo of a man with sad eyes, a face marked by time and adversity. Dimitri looked at the photo, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. That face, those eyes, were unmistakably familiar. It was him, Dimitri. It was your father. The beggar you passed every day, the one you humiliated, Samuel said, his voice soft but unyielding. The revelation hit Dimitri like a lightning bolt. The father he had scorned, the man he believed had abandoned his family, was the same man he, in his ignorance, had humiliated day after day. And yet, all these years, Thomas Elliot had watched his son from afar, proud of the man he had become, but full of sadness for not being able to be by his side. With the revelation of his father's true identity, Dimitri felt like he was in the midst of an emotional storm. The guilt of belittling his own father day after day mixed with a deep sadness for the years wasted in misunderstandings and distance. However, amidst the pain and regret, there was also a peculiar sense of relief. The truth, though painful, was at least now clear. The next morning, Dimitri found himself walking towards the spot where he always saw the beggar, now known as his father. His heart was pounding in his chest, a mix of anxiety and determination guiding his steps. But upon reaching the familiar spot, emptiness awaited him. There was no sign of Thomas. No pile of blankets, no tired and sad look. The place that once was his father's refuge was empty, leaving Dimitri with a tight knot of worry in his stomach. "Excuse me, have you seen the man who usually stays here?" Dimitri asked a passing woman, a hint of desperation in his voice. The woman's expression closed off, and she shook her head slowly. "He was taken to the hospital last night. It was a very cold night." Dimitri's heart seemed to stop. Worry turned into fear, and he felt the world around him spin. Had the truth about his father come too late? Would he lose the chance to reconcile with Thomas before even having it? The woman's words echoed in his mind, feeding the questions that tormented his heart. Driven by fear and propelled by the need to get to his father, Dimitri ran to the hospital. The cold and sterile lights of the hospital corridor reflected the urgency in his chest as he rushed, finally finding Thomas's room. There, in a hospital bed, was his father. Thomas looked like a shadow of the man in the photograph, his pale face contrasting starkly with the white sheets. His frailty made him seem even smaller, more vulnerable. With hesitant steps, Dimitri approached the bed. Taking Thomas's cold and weak hand in his, he felt a lump in his throat. His eyes filled with tears, and he leaned in to whisper in his father's ear. "Dad, I'm so sorry," he choked out, the words barely coming out. "For everything." Thomas's eyes opened slowly, meeting Dimitri's. A weak smile appeared on his lips, and he squeezed his son's hand with the little strength he had left. "Dimitri," he murmured, his voice weak but full of affection. "There's nothing to forgive." Thomas's words were like a balm to Dimitri's troubled heart. Though the circumstances were terrible, there was a certain comfort in knowing that in the end, his father understood. He knew of Dimitri's pain and regret, and yet he forgave him. "I'm just happy that you found out the truth," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible. He closed his eyes, a look of relief and contentment softening his features. In that moment, despite the pain and fear, Dimitri felt a strange sense of peace. He was with his father, finally understanding the truth and, more importantly, having the chance to ask for forgiveness. It was an opportunity that many did not have, and for that, Dimitri was grateful. As days turned into weeks, Dimitri became a constant presence at Thomas's hospital bedside. He filled the air with conversation and laughter, sharing stories from his life that Thomas had missed, his graduation, his first job, the joys and struggles of parenthood. He was desperately trying to make up for decades of silence and distance between them. However, despite Dimitri's efforts and the care of the doctors, Thomas's health continued to deteriorate. The vitality and strength that once shone in his eyes were fading, replaced by a pallor and weakness that were difficult to witness. And then, on a quiet night, when the only sound was the gentle whisper of Thomas's breath and the constant beep of the hospital monitors, Dimitri held his father's hand, a weak but comforting grip. "I'm here, Dad," Dimitri whispered, his words floating in the cold air of the room. "I love you." Thomas's eyes opened slightly, meeting Dimitri's. A weak and tired smile formed on his lips, and he gave a small nod, as if to say that he loved Dimitri too. And then, Thomas's eyes closed. His breathing, once so weak and irregular, calmed down, becoming silent. His grip on Dimitri's hand loosened, and in a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, Thomas Elliot closed his eyes for the last time. The silence that followed was deafening. Dimitri sat there, holding his father's hand, feeling the warmth slowly disappear. Tears freely fell from his eyes, but there was a small smile on his lips. Because despite the pain and loss, Dimitri knew that in the end, he had the chance to know his father, to love him and be loved by him. And although Thomas was no longer physically present, Dimitri knew that he would always be with him, in his heart and in his memories. Dimitri, the man who once ignored and belittled a beggar on the streets, now carried in his heart the hardest and most valuable lesson of his life. He now understood that every face hid a story, a set of struggles and triumphs, joys and sorrows. He recognized that everyone deserved respect and compassion, regardless of their situation or condition. Inspired by this revelation and the memory of his father, Thomas Elliot, Dimitri dedicated the rest of his life to serving the less fortunate. At Thomas's funeral, Dimitri found himself standing before a solemn crowd of faces. His voice rang out loud and clear, filled with emotion, as he shared the story of his father and the invaluable lesson he had learned. Thomas Elliot was a man of great heart, despite the adversity he faced, began Dimitri, his voice trembling slightly. He was my father. And although it took me a while to discover, the strength of his love for me, even from a distance, was unquestionable. He paused, clearing his throat before continuing. My father's life taught me the importance of looking beyond appearances, of understanding that every person has a story, a past, a life that deserves respect and dignity. There was a reverent silence in the crowd as Dimitri's words echoed. In memory of my father, continued Dimitri, his eyes shining with determination, I promise to use my position and resources to make a difference. I will transform the company I lead, directing a significant portion of profits towards creating programs to assist the homeless and underprivileged in our city, Chicago. Dimitri's commitment resonated among those present, a beacon of hope on a day of mourning. In his speech, Dimitri not only honored the memory of his father, but also promised to carry on Thomas's legacy, a promise of compassion, respect, and help for the less fortunate. A few months later, the first support center was inaugurated, named the Thomas Elliot Center, in honor of his father. Dimitri, now known for both his executive competence and his compassion and dedication to philanthropy, used his influence to encourage other business leaders to do the same. He never forgot his father's final words, "A man's true wealth is not measured by what he possesses, but by what he gives to others." Dimitri spent the rest of his life proving that his father's words were true, turning his pain and regret into actions that changed the lives of many people for the better. And so, the story of the powerful executive who humiliated a beggar, only to discover that this man was his father, became a lesson for everyone. A lesson about respect, compassion, and the importance of never judging someone by their current situation, for behind every face lies a story that deserves to be told and heard. And so, my dear viewers, we come to the end of this incredible journey, the story of Dimitri and Thomas Eliot. A story of revelations and redemption, of lost and found love, and the most important lesson of all, the value of respect and compassion. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? How did it touch you? Do you think Dimitri made the right choice in the end? And what is your opinion on his decision to dedicate a portion of the company's profits to help the less fortunate? Leave your thoughts, opinions, and reflections in the comments section below. I look forward to reading each and every one of them and hearing how this story touched you. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. Remember to activate notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos. Thank you for spending this time with us today, and until next time. Remember, every person has a story, and every story has the power to change the world. Goodbye.